This is Gemara Menachos, Daf Tzadik Ches, and we're holding on the top of Tzadik Ches Amar Aleph on the top line as we continue discussing the different sizes of the Kelim, which thereby allowed us to understand the size of the Mishkan, the Beis HaMikdash itself. We dealt yesterday with the fact that there are two different Amos. There is an Amma, well, there's really three different Amos, 5, 6, and 7 Tvachim. Amma Beinani being 5, and we discussed yesterday as there's a pasuk in Yecheskel that clearly shows us that in the Beis HaMikdash there were two Ammos utilized. There was an Amma of 5 and an Amma of 6 Tvachim. Seemingly, the Amma of 6 Tvachim were listed as being used in certain parts of the Mizbeach, the Kronos, and certain amos, and we first thought it was discussing on the height, but that didn't work, so we thought it was discussing in the width, and that didn't work, and we ended off saying how the amma of 6 tfachim was used in parts of the height and parts of the width, and that's how we have a correct size of the mizbeach and the correct size of the floor plan of the Beis HaMikdash. So now says the Gemara on the top line of Tzadik Ches Amar Aleph, we're now going to take that which we just said, and we're now going to compute this into the kashas that we asked in the previous pshat, which is, how does it work? Says the Gemara, Mizbeach Kamei Ave, Chamshin V'Tamnei Upalga. It comes, Chamshin V'Tamnei, 58 Tfachim. Why? Because all 10 amos of the height are 6 Tvachim, which Betzim is 60. 2 of them are not, minus the 2 of the base and the 1 of the base and the 1 of the horns, which were 5 Tvachim amos, and therefore we have a height of 58 Tvachim. And therefore, Palgdim is Be'akam. How much is half of 58? Esher V'Tisha is going to be 29 Tvachim. So the middle point of the Mizbeach is at 29 Tvachim. And again, we need to know this because that's where the Chota Sikra was, the line going around the middle of the Mizbeach. And we have to know that when you're standing on this Soivev and you lean down, are you still going to be above that middle line in order to place the dam? Says the Gemara, Mikranas Vatsayviv Kameave, from the horns until the Soivev is Eshem Itzlasa, 23. So half of the whole Mizbeach is 29. But from the horns down, it's going to be 23. Kama Batzir. Lepalge de Mizbeach. So how much space is there between the area of half of the Kronos to the Soivev, to the ledge, 23, to the middle line, the Chanasikra, 29, Shita 6, Utinan, and now it makes sense that we learned, if while standing on this Soivev, the Kohen leans down and puts it by his legs, Afilu Amachas, it's going to be Ksheira, because when he places his hand below his legs, it's still going to be above the 29, the halfway point of Chota Sikra. So even if you put a full 5, a tefach amma, you reach down a full amma under your legs, you're still going to be within a tefach of the Chota Sikra, and that's how the Oilas Oif is going to be kosher. Dekanami, this is precise. Why the pasuk says Chekam v'Reichav Shema Mina, the base of the Amma and the Amma of the width, meaning the pasuk itself seemingly indicates that it wasn't one directional Amma, either just going up or just going in, that we're utilizing this 6 tefach Amma. Actually, the 5 tefach Amma, everything else being the 6 tefach Amma, but rather it was both. Says the Gemara. So we've been assuming until now that the Amma Beinani was 6 tfach, but now the Gemara circles around in that detail and asks, how much is Amma Beinani? Amar Rav Yechon Shisha Tfachim. Amar Rav Yisi bar Rav and Avanan Mitanina. We also learned in a Mishnah, Rabbi Meir Aimer, Hashulchan Arka Shnei Masa V'Racha Shisha was 12 by 6 Tvachim. And the Shulchan, we know in the Psukim, were 1 amma by 2 ammas. So that fits perfectly. If an amma is 6 Tvachim, so 1 by 2 is 6 by 12. Says the Gemara, Michlal, this first, Havi Amod in Afisha Mina. As we started off today in our Akdama, we mentioned the 3 types of Amos. So says the Gemara, if you're telling me that the Beinoini is 6 Tvachim, clearly indicating that there's one that is larger, one that is smaller. So one that is smaller, we've been discussing the 5 Tefach. Says the Gemara, it's really one that is larger. Responds the Gemara in yes. V'atanan, as we learned in our Mishnah and Kalim, Shtei Amois Haya B'Shushan Abira. There were 2 Amoy sticks. In Shushan Abira, Achas al Karen Mizrachis, Fainis Vachas al Karen Mizrachis, Jeroimis. One at the northeastern corner of the Lishka. This is in Shushan Abira, which is a place inside the Beis HaMikdash. And it had a picture of Shushan Abira on top of it. And inside this Lishka, inside this chamber, there were 2 sticks. One in the southeastern corner, one in the northeastern corner. Says the Gemara, Shalkar Mizrachas Finest Yisera Al Shal Moshe. The one in the northeastern corner was larger than the one of Moshe. Chatzi Etzba was larger than the 6 Tefach Amba of Moshe by a half of a finger. Shalkar Mizrachas Draimis. The one in the southeastern corner was was also half a finger longer than Moshe. Nim says it comes out Yisera al Shal Moshe Etzba. So it comes out that this Amma in this Beis HaMikdash was larger than the Amma of Moshe Rabbeinu by a full finger. V'lama Amro on the second white line, and why do we say V'lama Amro Achas Kedela v'Achas Ketana? Why are we telling us there's one larger, one smaller? Kedei, so that Shehu Omnin Neitlim B'Ketana Machzirim B'Gedela, because they wanted that the craftsmen for the Beis HaMikdash would take contracts with the smaller measurements and return it with the larger measurements. Why? If you always have a little bit extra that you're adding on, you never have to be concerned of any potential mi'ila, any potential benefit from the Beis HaMikdash. Why? Because it would always be a little bit more that they would add on. V'tarti lamali. Says the Gemara, okay, so why do we need 2 of these measuring sticks? One for gold and silver, and one for binyan, one for actually building. Says Rashi over here, what were the 2 used for? It says Rashi's directly across. Let's actually go up one Rashi. We have a moment. Well, we don't really, but either way, let's do it. They should take the smaller one. The Gizmer, the treasurer, would stipulate with the craftsman, Tevnoi lebedek abayis, such and such for the bedek abayis. V'kach lekach damim ba'ama shel Moshe machzirin lemidas ama gedel sheisir la'etzba kedei sheisivo al tanom mishalem. They would add on to their stipulation shleipaschu shouldn't be any smaller than imtzu nanim in a hektish yosim ima she'asu ban lidei mi'ila. So there were 2 of them chadel davak likasva. By those who worked with gold, why? Because they So says the Gemara, fascinating, that when you're working with gold and silver, it has to be a little bit more, because you're much more precise with gold and silver, smaller, precise measurements. But when you're building in the larger sense, then you use the one that was larger with the etzba. Says the Gemara in the fourth white line. Tananas, we learned in a Mishnah. A Mishnah midai Shara Mizrach alav Shushan Abira Tzura. Shara Mizrach had a picture of Tzura Shushan Abira on top of the gate. My time, what's the reason? Rav Chisda, Rav Yitzchak, Rav Dimi. Chad Amar, one says K'dei Sheimechan Ba. One says they would always remember where they came from. They came from the Galus Bavel and Persia. And the other one says no. They want to have the Persian royalty to make sure they didn't rebel. The Persians allowed them to build the base of Mikdash, and they made them make this picture so that they would not rebel against the Persians. So according to the first pshat, it's a form of Haidah, or it's a form of either Haidah thanks to the Persians or thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he allowed them to return and build the base of Mikdash. Building off the second shot, says the Gemara, you should always have the fear of the kingdom upon you. It says, bow down to me, Moshe said regarding Paro's servants. He didn't say regarding Paro himself. Why? Out of showing respect to Paro. Rav Yechon Amar Me'acha Shenem Rav Yad Hashem Yisrael Yo Vayishani Masnav Vayars of the Achlad Bacha Yisraela. Again, we see again that Eliyahu Hanavi, even though Achav was traveling by himself, Eliyahu Hanavi ran in front of Achav. Why? Because the king should never travel by himself. Another Mikar showing us you have to have Amos Malchus Olecha. Says the Gemara, we just had a machlekes of Chisda and Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi. So the Gemara continues in a similar vein with another machlekes, not as relevant to our discussion, but the same people. We're at the two dots, about 15 lines into the white lines. Says the Gemara, quoting a pasuk in Yecheskel, Va'aleu litrufa. Says the pasuk, the leaves will be for healing. Rav Chisda, these are trees that are going to be growing on the banks of a river coming out of the Kodesh HaKadoshim Lasalavai. Rav Chisda, Rav Yitzchak bar Avdini, Chanamar lahatir peshel amayla. One says, when you eat the leaf, you'll have the ability to open your mouth, that a mute will then be able to talk. V'chadamar lahatir peshel amayla. The peshel lamata will be healed, that a woman wasn't able to have children, will be able to have children. Itmar Chizkiya Marlata Ilmim, Bar Kapara Marlata Akares, showing exactly these two pshatim. Either the Ilmin, the mute, will be able to talk, or the Akara will be able to have children. Says the Gemara, let's get back into the Shulchan. Tanu Rabban, Ilu Nemer Lekach L'Selas Vafisa Yisa Shnei Masri Chalois. Samtasam. If the pasuk would have said, take the fine flour, bake the 12 loaves, and put it onto 2 stacks, and did not tell us it was 6 stacks, I would have thought that you have 1 of 4 and 1 of 8. If you just said 2 rows, and 6 to a stack, but it didn't tell us the total number. You know what I would have thought? I would have thought that there were 2 sacks, 6 to a stack, but it doesn't mean it has to be only 2. I would have thought that maybe there are 3, and you have 6 in each row. Therefore, that it said there's 12 in the total. And then tells us it was 2 rows. 3 rows of 4 apiece. So without these 3 psukim, teaching us there were 12. Teaching us there were 2 rows. Teaching us there were 6 to a row. Lola man, I wouldn't know this. Says the Gemara, but what happens if you have 2 stacks of 7, Rabbi Yomer Rayin Esal Yoina Kilu Einon, we're allowed to view the top one as if it's not there. And therefore, it's as if there's 2 rows of 6 and it's all good. Ay, Vayinon. V'nesata al. We have to put it on top of it, says the Gemara. That therefore, if the top one is not part of the row breads, then when you put the levine on top of it, you're not putting it on top of any of the lechem abanim. Armli Rav Chisda Rav Nuna, Armli Rav Nuna Rav Chisda, Rebbe L'Taimei Damar. So what does it mean? Al? It means bisamuch. And therefore, even if it's not directly on top of the top loaf, but it's on top of another one, that's going to be fine. Titania, as we learned in our Braisa, Rabbi Yomer v'nesata b'arechas lavoina zakal b'samach hater ram sabachinu elam amish kshoimer v'sakoi salaronesa b'arechas aviyomer al b'samach. So Rabbi holds his own. Doesn't have to be directly on top of it. And now we quote the Mishnah Nachamol Kolakin Mikdash, that the length went in the length of the Mishkan. Tanarabban Kolakin Mikdash Arkon Larkal Shalbayis Chos. May Aron Shakal Rachma Shalbayis, the length of the Aron went to the width of the Bayis. Kachayamunach, and such was how the Aron was placed. Bada v'kachaya bada menachim, and so too were the poles placed. He says, you don't understand. Mike Amar, what's this extra point telling me that the poles were placed that way? Of course, if the Aron was placed that way, the poles went with the Aron. Hachikar kachayamunach midib. The Aron was placed this way because its poles were placed this way. The Braisa is telling us that the way we know the Aron went that way was because the poles went that way. Says the Gemara Shkayach. How do you know the poles went that way? Titania, we learned in our Braisa, abadim. Says the Pasuk, in Malachim Aleph, they extended the poles, showing us that it went towards the curtain that separated the Kodesh from the Kodesh HaKadoshim. You think maybe he didn't touch the Bereiches. And it was seen that it was indented into the curtain. So I would have thought maybe it's going to rip the Bereiches v'yaitim. Maybe you want the whole sticking out and you can see them in the Kodesh. So okay, said, how can you have this? How can you have that you both could see it and not see it? You have the Aron inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and we're learning you have to see the poles but not see the poles. How is that shaykh as we turn over to Sadiq Hasim? He says the Gemara, they push into the Parayches and they indent a little bit. Like the 2 breasts of a woman, that Kadosh Baruch Hu gives the mashal that the Sarar Amar is beloved to me, and it's lodged between my 2 dadim, indicating that we're referring to the Kodesh HaKadoshim. You already used such a mashal, and that's how when the 2 poles stick and hit into the paraychas, it makes an indent that from the other side, all you see is 2 indented areas sticking out like the dadei ha'isha. Ask the Gemara on the 3rd line, so you know which way the poles went, but how do you know that the poles went into the width of the Aron? Maybe the poles went into the length, and if the poles went into the length and they're sticking into the curtain, so then it is going the same way that the Mishkan ran, and it would not be the width way. Says Rav Yehuda, simple math. Why 2 men cannot stand in 1.5 amos? You have 4 people holding the Aron, 2 in the front and 2 in the back, and therefore, if it went in the length of the Aron, the space between it is too narrow. It's not enough for 2 people to walk. Says the Gemara, Menachos, 6 lines down, how do you know that 4 people carry the Aron? Maybe it's only 2. Maybe it's 1 in the front and 1 in the back. As the pasuk says, V'nasu ha'kasim, the kasim carried Shrei. V'nasu ha'mikdash, Nami Trey. So from the psukim we clearly see that there were 4 people. Tanu Rabbanan, says the Gemara. Continuing the discussion of the different kelim of the Mishkan, now we're going to move on to the kelim of the Beis HaMikdash of Shlomo HaMelech. Some details that maybe are not so known. Says the Gemara, Asar Shulchanais, Asar Shlomo HaMelech. Shlomo HaMelech made 10 Shulchanais, and every Shulchanais Asara. Vayanach, and he placed them Meichal. Chamishim and Chamishim is small, 5 on the right and 5 on the left. Imkain, says the Gemara, comes out. No, excuse me. Chamisha. Vim timer Chamishim minap. No, I read it wrong. Go back. V'yashol chanais. Excuse me, I said. Asar v'yinich Chamishim min Chamishim is small. Vim timer. If you're going to tell me Chamishim min Pesach, and you tell me that it means 5 to the right of the dory, Chamisha l'smol Pesach, and 5 to the left of the dory, then it's going to come out that some 5 of the Shulchanais is in the south. And what's the problem? Vatayir Amr says no possible Shulchan Tidin El Selat Safain. That the Shulchan has to be in the north. Elam Shalmaisha Bemsa Chamishimim Chamisha Bisma. Well, you know what it was? The Shulchan of Moshe Rabbeinu was in the middle. And then Shlomo HaMelech put 5 more on the right and 5 more on the left of Moshe's, not the left of the door. And therefore it comes out that all 11 or 10 of them are all on the right side, the north side of the Beis HaMikdash. Tanu Rabbanan, continuing the Gemara, not only did Shlomo HaMelech make 10 Shulchanais, but he also made 15 lines down. The first one line is Rabbanan Eser Minayrais. 10 Minayrais. Also Shlomo Shenemar. Yes, the Minayrais says of Eser Kimish Bavitin Beichel Chamishim Min Chamishim Ismol. Vim Taiming Natami Chamishim Min Abesach Chamishim Ismol Abesach. Im Kein Vatzinu Minayra Batzal Vamaterai Mirvesa Minayra Chashochan. Elo, the same shot. Shal Moshe V'Emza Chamishim Yimina V'Chamishim Ismaila. Moshe Rabbeinu's Minayra was in the middle on the left side, of course, the southern side, and then Shlomo HaMelech placed 5 on the right, 5 on the left, but they're all in the southern side. Tinichada, we learned in one brisa, Machatzi Bayis Levnim Hayamunachim, that the Shulchanais were placed halfway of the Beis HaMikdash and inward. Tanichad, Mishlosh HaBayis, Lefnim a third, Hayamunachim Eloi Kasha, Mark Choshav Bayis, Kachei HaKashim Badi Eichel, Mar Lichosh HaBayis, Kachei HaKashim Badi Eichel. Depends who you count. If the length includes the Kachei HaKashim, then it's in halfway. If the length only goes till the Kaddish Kashim, then it's in the third. Tanu Rabbanan, and with this we conclude 2 lines from the white lines. The Shulchanis were placed lengthway from east to west. If you Rabbi, north to south. My time of the Rabbi in the first white line. That the Ner Maravi, the westernmost lamp, you should arrange it. Sounds like that the Ner Maravi was Lifnei Hashem, but the rest of them were not Lifnei, precisely Lifnei Hashem. What does that mean? If you're going to tell me that the Menorah was set up north to south, then Kulanami Lifnei Hashem, they knew they're all Lifnei Hashem. Why? Because they're all equal from the Kodesh HaKadoshim, so it must be that it was the other way, and only the Ner Maravi was Lifnei Hashem. And that's Pshat in Rebbe. Now, for Rav Shimon, what is he old? Rav Shimon, fourth white line. My time, what does he learn? It is indeed Safain v'Darain, Kamar mi Arim, Arim Safain Nami Safain Darain. For Rebbe Nami Legumi, why doesn't Rebbe say that? Danachos b'chosei, Danachos b'ftim. Says Rebbe, I'd rather learn out the Menorah from the Shulchan, or I say the Shulchan from the Menorah, and not. Excuse me, I'd rather learn I said it right the first time, the Shulchan to the Menorah, and not from the shulchan to the aron, because aron's in kodesh hakadosh, rather not things that are all together in the kodesh. Let's Rav Shimon legmar me'meneira. Amr l'cha meneira gufei safam v'daran ave munchos. Let's Rav Shimon. The meneira itself was north to south, and therefore that cannot be a makar that that cannot be the makar that the shulchan was east to west, because he argues and it says that the menorah was north to south. So says the Gemara, that which it says, so says the Gemara, according to Rav Shimon. 1 second, where did my Gemara go? Which shows us, what does he do with the pasuk? That it sounds like there was only one candle that was Lifnei Hashem. So how does Rav Shimon learn that they're all Lifnei Hashem? As if they're all facing the Kodesh HaKodashim, they're all Lifnei Hashem. Answers the Gemara, that the wicks return towards the center, and the Ner Ma'aravi's wick, just that wick was facing towards the Kodesh HaKodashim. So the Gemara is learning that according to Rav Shimon, you're right. Indeed, all of them, the entire menorah is quote unquote Lifnei Hashem, because each of the candles is equidistant to the Kodesh HaKadosh. However, one candle, one wick, the Ner Ma'aravi, was situated Lifnei Hashem. You see the picture over here that we just pulled up from Art Scroll, a beautiful picture. So you see all the candles are Ba'atzem Lifnei Hashem. They're all facing towards the Kodesh HaKadoshim. But he would make the wick of the Ner Ma'aravi Lifnei Hashem, and that's how we fulfilled the dictum of the pasuk. And we conclude the Tanya, as it says in Abraisa, El Mul Penei HaMenorah Yushev HaSaneiros Melame Mitzadedin Peneihem Klapei Ner Emsoi. Says the Gemara, and let's stop over here. We're going to discuss a little bit more about the Ner Ma'aravi, but we're pretty short on time, so let's pick it up from here. B'siyata Tishmaya.